I wanted to just bring in the term, the sentence, stop gaslighting me, as I tend to consistently see it relate to disagreements. And I thought we could all riff on that a little bit. So I wonder if, let's dive in.
Yes, let's talk about that.
Gaslighting.
I think this actually really applies to safety. That for a lot of people, safety is knowing that I'll always be agreed with. And if I'm not being agreed with, or if I'm not, and this is another term, I want to be seen, I want to be heard. And what they're really saying is, I want you to agree with me. I want you to validate me. And if you don't agree with me, if you don't validate me, then you're gaslighting me. Those things are not synonymous.
Welcome to the Holistic Life Navigation Podcast, where we explore life through the lens of somatics. I'm Luis Mujica, a somatic educator who teaches people how to find safety in themselves. Your turn to learn begins now. Welcome, my friends. We are being joined today. So this is our HLN Team podcast, and we're being joined by a friend and colleague of mine, Thayer Case. Thayer, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I want you first to just orient the listeners to you. Tell us like what you do. Tell us about Maverick, anything you want us to know.
Sure. First, I'm a psychotherapist and I'm a coach. I do both. I am director of fairly large psychotherapy group with a trauma and somatic focus. I'm up here in the Catskills, Woodstock, Kingston area, and from New York. And so I've spent the last 15, 20 years really diving into somatics and trauma work and integrating spirituality and aggression and all these wonderful things into helping heal all different kinds of ways that we suffer. I also have done a fair amount of consulting and teaching with some Fortune 500 companies or not-for-profits or teams, and I really enjoy doing that as well. So yeah, I've been really working with kind of groups and also with individual work as well. I also have been helping out in the somatic experiencing trainings for a long time too here, and so it's good to be here. Yeah.
I was happy to invite you here because we were talking. We had dinner a couple times, and I've said this to my team, and I've said this to groups and students and other spaces that I do work in. It's difficult to find fellow trauma therapists and educators and facilitators that also have like a pretty rich sense of humor about trauma and about psychology and about pain and suffering. And I've always found irreverence and kind of like filth culture to be so healing. It has gotten me through so much pain. Like I would have probably died growing up without it. So our team, we are always, I mean, people heard us behind closed doors. They wouldn't want to listen to us, but we're kind of giving them
sign. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So we're kind of giving them a peek at that today because Thayer and I were talking about something that Camille, Marika, and Evan and I talk about, these words that we hear that are in the mainstream, whether it's pop psych culture or somatic culture, that we want to have some fun with today. We want to list the words that just like either the words like irk us or the ones that we think are silly or the ones that we want to reclaim and say, actually, it means this, and kind of play with it. So that's what we're going to do with today. We're going to see where it takes us. And I thought to be a good host, we'd let Thayer bring the first word. So why don't you drop it and we can go from there.
Look, can I put one framing around it too?
Please.
Yeah, that I think, is a phrase that I use a lot when I'm teaching or training people, which is, the ability to hold heavy things lightly is a really good way of when we're holding space for people, if we hold it too preciously, it becomes very fragile. And if we're holding space for people who've been really hurt, which is like all of us, or some more than others, perhaps, then, it becomes fragile. And I think to be able to become agile as a healer or as a way of holding space is really important. So all that being said, the language is is very facile and it's strange. And I just want to introduce one concept. I think maybe I was sending this to you earlier, Luis, but in Zen Buddhism, there's a phrase that painted cakes do not satisfy hunger, which is, what is a word? I think one of the reasons I appreciate your work, Luis, as I've told you, is that it's very direct. It's about experience. So words can get tricky. And so sometimes I'm always like, what the hell are we even freaking talking about anymore here? Especially in the echo chambers of social media, or like people say it with utmost seriously. It's this. Like, really? What is this? What is that? For instance, let's see. I feel like we should have a wheel.
Oh my God, that'd be amazing. I should have made a wheel.
Okay, what's one that's okay. This is a big one to start with. Triggered.
Oh, yes. Camille is just talking about this one.
Let's go with triggered.
Let's go.
Let's turn this term. Luis, what is triggered? What does that mean?
Oh, well, there's so many things it means. I'll start saying for me what it doesn't mean. What it doesn't mean for me is that I disagree with you, or you disagree with me. Like a disagreement, right? Doesn't have to be something that triggers me. I think what people are trying to say when they use the word triggered is I'm uncomfortable, rather than my body's being propelled into like a full-on attack of horrible, traumatic, painful memory, from the past. So I play with those two things of discomfort versus I lost my entire agency in this moment to a flashback.
Yeah, no, that's great. I really like that. I think, triggered, like you said, if we take it if we take trauma and boil it down to a simple, like, what is trauma but a past present intrusion, then a trigger would be something that, like you said, that incites a full-blown, like, I have no idea where I am on the timeline at this point. I'm incredibly disoriented. I'm reacting to stimulus A as if it was stimulus B. Or I'm reacting to stimulus B as if it was stimulus A. And that's my experience of it. And I don't want to take that away from people, because that's a really important awareness to have. I mean, we're working with this. However, like you said, if triggered becomes I'm uncomfortable, then like we're gonna have nobody communicating with each other, because basically nobody will say anything because everybody's uncomfortable all the time, which is true. It's uncomfortable to communicate.
That's right.
So yeah, I agree. It's like triggered can often be used as I'm upset because I'm triggered, which then makes it so it's difficult to communicate or to communicate directly. So it's not that it's like how do we rein triggered back into an accurate term as opposed to a catch-all for I'm having a feeling.
Well, it's interesting because we were playing with this today in the course, and Camille said it really well. She, there's that we just said, triggered, and that's the kind of what I see as the classical sense, the origin of it. And then this new sense that I can also get behind, I'm curious where you go, is it's the catalyst to take me to a feeling. We think of like catharsis, like when someone says, oh, it triggered a thought or triggered a memory. So there's that psychological PTSD triggered, and then there's the act of something awakened in me because of the stimulus. And that latter one, I think, is an excellent tool at helping people relate to those parts that awaken in response to something, rather than seeing it as something really horrible that happened, that I was taken to a feeling inside of myself. And I wonder where, I wonder where I'll let Camille in a moment talk about it, but where do you go with that there? Like, how does that land for you?
Well, I think if you think of like literally what a trigger is, right? Like, so like you said, it's the means to which an action occurs.
That's right.
So like the trigger isn't actually the problem. Like,
that's right.
So the trigger is it's a way that we're using describing reality in a chain reaction to some degree. So it's again, it's about stimulus equals this equals that, right? And like, so I like that idea of like thinking about it as like it's the trigger is the action that solicits a, in somatic experiencing or in conditioning language, you'd say an overcoupled or a conditioned response, because they've survived. Right. So that is where we struggle. Like the trigger is a description if something happens. I'm curious, like how we'd say trigger in different languages. Like
Yeah, that'd be cool.
like what would that be? I mean, there's a kind of violent imagery. I mean, trigger. It's like a trigger of a gun,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And anyone listening from other countries, let us know. Drop a comment below or email Evan info@holistic life navigation. Let us know, like, what words do you use for your body remembering or feeling something? Camille, talk about it a bit, because he just said exactly what you said in the course. We were
Yeah.
just teaching week 5 of our course, and you said the trigger takes you to awakens the overcoupling, and the overcoupling, that's where all the gold is. That's the thing
Yes.
keeping us from feeling free. So tell us about it. My cat's screaming. I'm gonna let her in.
And I love the way you said it, Luis, like that's the gold. What I guess rubs me the wrong way is when people use getting triggered to say, I shouldn't have to feel this. I shouldn't have to feel bad, or you shouldn't trigger me, or I shouldn't have to get triggered. That's what I'm finding comes up a lot, that I shouldn't have to experience being triggered. Whereas I think there's a lot of gold, like you said, Luis, in being triggered. There's something there if we have the capacity to get curious about, what is this awakening in me? What is this reminding me of? What is this tapping into?
Yeah, that piece that's what interests me so much is it's what I love about somatics, at least the way I understand them and work with them, is we're looking for the activation and the overcoupling. Like that's the goal, is taking you to this portal inside your body that's holding some kind of unexpressed, compressed, memory or future fear. And to try to avoid that and walk around it is such a disservice for the body on so many levels. I wonder how it's switched from something that is gold to something that I shouldn't ever experience.
Well, I think I should never experience is an overcoupled of shame and immobility. So like that's how, if somebody's like, there's still gold there, it's just has another layer of defense around it because it's so painful. So it's, I think, like if we're thinking about slowing it down, that's why I think investigations of words and what it, like, if we just dropped in, like what is triggered feel like or mean, or what associations or images or anything we have, we might have all these associations. We might, like, I don't want to feel that way means that we are in an active past present intrusion, or else we wouldn't be defended against it. Yeah.
So we were talking about in my course earlier, we were saying to the students, because some of them were saying, well, how do you enjoy getting triggered? Because Camille said, I enjoy getting triggered now, and I enjoy triggering. And she doesn't mean that she doesn't mean that she like
great.
goes out of
Remind me not to talk to Camille. Yeah.
you need to talk to Camille first. But she doesn't go out of her way to like make everyone uncomfortable. She just makes people uncomfortable being herself because she's not fawning. And we're always laughing at her and Evan. They're the autistic siblings of HLN because they're so direct in their approach to things. So there isn't a lot of like fluffing it up. And so that can be super triggering for people, because if we think of someone like with certain attachment styles, they're really wanting to be fawned to or told a certain story themselves, and it settles them. And when you're around someone that's not willing to tell that story, it creates a little bit of a rupture. And then we call this like, I'm triggered because of you. But Camille's saying, well, I see triggered as gold. So when I trigger you, like, where's my thank you card? Where's the thank you card in the mail that something came up to meet you? And so I think it's about, and this is maybe another word, capacity, like having the space in the body to feel the sensations when we get triggered and not see it as a negative thing, but as something that's shifting inside.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think maybe like as you guys were talking, I was thinking that maybe what it seems to me, what Camille might be embarking on is being skillful. So, by having people be a certain level of discomfort, you can't learn unless you're uncomfortable.
That's right.
So, but again, that's it's just so funny how this thing keeps changing and morphing. Like, but so to me, triggered would be like a true triggered state would be when we have lost our observing ego. That is a triggered state. Like, nobody's learning when they are actually triggered. Like, if somebody is triggered, then I think that means there's a level of safety that's gone, and there's a the defenses are so intense that we lose a sense of ourselves, and that's what a trigger. For instance, like I work with a lot of vets, like war veterans, not animal people, although them too, I guess. But like and or people who are in law enforcement, or people have seen a lot of very violent things that have been in war, right? So, I remember there was one story where somebody was talking about, how sometimes like the dryer, when it's drying clothes, like will get off of balance and go, or the washing machine, right? And so he was getting annoyed with that, so he jumped on top of it and sat on it. And it sounds exactly like helicopter.
Mm.
And he was gone.
Mm-hmm.
He was back in the war. That's true. We're not going to do anything at that moment, right? Somebody has to move through that, and then we can work with it. Or if you're actually with somebody in the moment of that, then that's different. So I say I like to reserve trigger to when there's a loss of observing ego. And
I love
we
that.
are we are in the past.
Yep.
Right? There's not one foot here anymore.
Yeah, I love that. I talk about that similarly, because I'm always going between these two different meanings of triggered is the catalyst, the catharsis that took me to a feeling, and triggered is I lost the agency to notice and witness and be here. They both work for me. But you said a word that was very triggering. You said safety.
Yes,
and I thought it'd be very fun to play with safety. Because Marika, you had said on a past episode, I forget which one it was, you were saying that if you go to a place and they call it a safe space, you feel extremely uncomfortable. So I thought, why don't you start this conversation off about safe spaces?
I understand the need for safe spaces, and I have benefited from being in a place that I felt that was safe. But I find that if that's sort of the lead in is that it's a safe space, to me, it just feels like that means the people who are there are more likely to get triggered or more dysregulated. And they don't want conflict, and they don't want to have like, maybe a conversation. Because like, of course, if I'm going into a room and I know everybody agrees with me, like I probably am not going to get triggered. But that's not really what those aren't the rooms I want to walk into. I just want to walk into the rooms that have people in them, right? And so, yeah, it feels like this extra layer of nothing sometimes. Even though I can also say I have completely benefited from being in a space with all women, let's say, or all people of color. Like, I had a different sense than I did in, say, other rooms.
But would you call it a safe space, or would you call it like, a familiar?
Well, it just felt like a familiar, more like a familiar co-regulating type of a space.
Got it.
But I understood, because I know what it feels like to not feel safe, like the feeling that you're going for when you call a safe, a space safe. Like I understand the reasoning behind it, but for the most part, it just, when I've gone to those meetings, it feels like people are more ready to be triggered and really afraid of being triggered because of whatever that's going to mean.
Yeah. And I'm just curious, I'm playing with these words. We were talking about triggered. I wondered if the word we're trying to say when we all say triggered is just activated, like something activated and aroused my nervous system. I'm still here. I'm still present. I'm still breathing. Okay. Maybe it gets a little shallow, but I'm here. I know I'm in this room and that person pissed me off, but I'm here. I'm still witnessing that. I think we explore a lot how activation is so overcoupled with something bad. And so if activation is also overcoupled with being triggered, and we all kind of know subconsciously triggered is this thing where you're flung out of here and you have no agency, then of course activation is terrifying. We assume it's going to lead to that. So I get curious about the safe space term because, like Camille talked for herself in a moment, but you talk about brave spaces so much and about being uncomfortable and about, like Thayer said, like you learn through the discomfort. It really takes you to discomfort. For me is just an unexplored part of myself. Like once it's explored and I've made friends with it and I'm at home in it, it's comfortable. It's not this place I don't want to go to. So when I think of safe spaces, and this is me speaking, there's something like innocently manipulative about it. And I've done it. I've called spaces that I've held in the past safe until I started realizing this more. I'm projecting a story onto people that you will be safe here. And how can I know that? And something about that projection, that story draws people that really want the promise of safety, which I think is an impossible promise. So I'm curious where we all go with that. Anyone that wants to dive in?
Oh, yeah. I've never really liked the term. For me, when people describe a place as safe, it always feels like the parent who's, I'm the cool mom. No, you're not, because if you were the cool mom, you wouldn't have to say you're the cool mom. And
That's
so
right.
if you're a space that's describing yourself as a safe space, I'm like, are you really? Because you might not have to be doing that. And to your point, particularly when we think about it somatically, no one can make a space safe for you. If safety really comes from my capacity, my resiliency, what am I able to attune to in my body? Am I overcoupled by what people do or say in the space?
Mm.
So when we put that responsibility on ourselves and say, this is a safe space for you, and then that person doesn't feel safe, it's like this unnecessary round and round. That's why for me, brave spaces are much more impactful. I describe the spaces I facilitate as being brave spaces. I invite people to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. We don't know what's going to come up. We don't have to agree. We might get triggered. We might get activated, and we'll be with it and we'll see where it goes.
See, that's what they were saying earlier about fragility and preciousness. That's exactly my experience, because when I used to market and use these terms of this is a safe space, or we're going to have a safe space together, I had to do so much hand holding. And I don't mean that like in a condescending way. I mean like literally. It's something that would literally be holding hands. But people were coming in with this expectation that I gave them that this is safe, which means you're not going to be uncomfortable, you're not going to get activated, you're not going to feel anything undesirable. When I switched that into, I can't promise that you're going to feel safe here, but I can promise I'll teach you techniques to access internal safety and to have fun with activation and to play with overcouplings. Then, I mean, the demographic of people showing up, amazing difference in terms of their resilience, their openness, their consent to going into somewhere that's really uncomfortable versus thinking they're consenting to this is going to be great and everyone's going to take care of me. And it made it easier for me because there wasn't this impossible expectation that I was burdened with, that I burdened myself with. How do you see that in your practice there? Like, how do you see the word? Do you see safety being used like in this external way, like I'm creating it for you, or do you see it being used to like I'm going to teach you how to feel that in yourself?
Well, not if I've trained somebody. I mean, if there's like, I agree kind of what Mariko was saying, that like, I think maybe there's been an evolution of like, when that term first started being used, I think that, perhaps that was associated with like a space of affinity or a place where people can, there's some measure of like affinity that like that in circumstances or social circumstances that might be difficult for you, those factors are not there. So like creates like a it's and again like for some people never had that experience ever. So I think that's where it really is so important. Now, this is where it gets complicated and juicy, is that safe. I mean, I think one of the problems that I have, I mean, it's not a problem, but like the way our language is binary. So like, it's dualistic. So whenever we invite something like safety, what also comes up? Unsafe. So you cannot say the word safe without danger being invoked.
Yep.
Because it doesn't exist without danger. So I like to think like safety is like in reaction to like that it's in a dynamic relationship with danger and safety, right? As opposed to like a like what Camille was saying, I like the term brave. Like brave is kind of an open, it's, I guess, like, maybe being a wimp is the opposite of that. I mean, maybe there's that in there and maybe people think that, I don't know, but it doesn't have as strong as of association. So coming back a long time ago, somebody said to me, which really resonated, I don't know, it's maybe about 15 years ago. So like like I always tell people, like, if you say, do you feel safe? I was with Evan and I said, we came into a session or on Zoom or whatever. And I said, Evan, I'd like to create some safety with you. You'd probably like, whoa, like what a creep. Right. It would, that would be, like, is the session over? Like, right. Because immediately it's like, I think it was Camille was saying, like, there's a saying that the unsolicited assertion is always a defensive lie. So like if you assert something, you are actually saying the opposite.
Yep.
Like,
100%.
like, oh, I don't really think that's funny. Like, I didn't ask you. So clearly
Right.
So
no offense. No offense, but
no offense, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that's what I've been enjoying in the last 3 years in particular with the way I hold space now, is to really see that, oh, I'm not promising anything. I'm not creating an idea. Yeah, exactly. And
who's saying?
It's reactionary. So the way I teach safety is it's the perception of non-threat. So when I'm in a room and I'm looking around right here in this room, my cat's on my lap, it's like beautiful outside, you four are here and there's nice plants. I'm perceiving that right now there's nothing here that's threatening me. And I start feeling that settling that we talk about all the time. And that's what I call safety. It's a settling in response to seeing that right now there's no threat. But that's a perception. That's so individual. And so there's no way to say this is what's safe for me could be a nightmare for you. So to say that I'm going to create safety with you, which I used to market that was my actual marketing. I think I'd say like creating safety for you or something. And then I realized, no, the people have to create safety in themselves, their own perception, their own work. And then it started shifting so much for me. Hey, my friends. I created a space that is affordable, accessible, and anyone is allowed to join anytime, and it's called the Library Membership. The Library Membership is an online private platform that hosts dozens of my webinars, my somatic practices, private mini lectures, and movement practices. There's also a monthly sound healing, and you'll be invited to a weekly Tuesday live mini practice with me and other participants. You'll also be invited to be a live audience member in our monthly HLN Team podcast recordings, where you'll take place in the Q&A that happens off air after the episode is filmed. For more information on this membership, click on the link below, or go to holisticlifenavigation.com and click on membership and then library. You can join right now, and you can cancel or pause your subscription at any time. I look forward to seeing you in there. Evan, what's it like to be implored by Thayer to create safety with him? What are your thoughts about this topic?
Yeah, totally. Well, I wanted to add too about what Thayer was bringing up. That was kind of where I was going with it, where being in spaces that have been promised to be safe spaces, I've often noticed, again, not all cases, but often, there's a kind of hypervigilance that comes about because there's almost like since the orientation, like going to a space that's labeled as safe, you're most likely coming from an orientation that all other spaces are unsafe, or most other spaces are unsafe.
Yeah.
So when you arrive at this safe space in maybe a hypervigilant, very activated state, there's often, and I mean, I felt it too, like being in that space, you're kind of watching for every little thing that could be potentially unsafe. And then just kind of the general dissociative kind of thing that can breed when you're in a room full of very hypervigilant people.
Yeah.
And then how, in the sense that, I mean, maybe it doesn't necessarily have, I mean, the space itself would be potentially in some ways the same whether or not it's marketed as that, but because it's being presented as that, the way that bodies are showing up might be, even though the space itself is technically safe, the feeling that a lot of people are having is of unsafety and how that plays into the actual space itself.
Yes, I love that. And that's when I was saying I experienced a shift in the people coming to the work I do now is because of that, because they're coming with a curiosity. and with a knowing that I'm going to feel things that are big, and that doesn't mean I'm not safe. There's a curiosity, like, well, what does that mean? Activation does not equal threat. You know, that's the biggest like the biggest trick of having a human body is that the activated nervous system completely relates to the adrenals the same way a fight or flight system, a fight or flight response is related to or felt biologically. So the biology is the same as threat, but the threat isn't actually happening. So when we overcouple activation with threat or something wrong, then we do think the absence of activation is safety. Whereas what I'm starting to see more and more in myself and in the groups we get to work with is they're starting to see, oh, my activation is part of my aliveness. They see it as like their vitality and the fact that they're here rather than a reason why something's going badly. And then there seems to be much more capacity and resilience for those sensations that before would have been avoided.
Yeah, I might put, I mean, like, I think that, like, I think I feel it through and think it like with a slight difference. That I think that, like, when, like, the way I understand activation, again, another made up word, like when we, like, you know, like whatever, you know, the way I understand it or use it is that when there is any, like, a smidgen or even a wind of a threat response that's on the line, whether there's actually a real or perceived threat, I mean, you know, whatever that means. I mean, if there's not like a rhino chasing you, you know, like maybe, but we can have a threat to the self, you know, or a threat of, like, you know, saying the wrong thing, or the threat of perfectionism, or the threat of, you know, looking a certain way or sounding a certain way, or, you know, let's get the scroll out of our insecurities. So like an insecurity to me is like just like if we're just looking through a purely threat lens, would be like an activation would be like any kind of threat that elicits a defense of some kind, right? So when we get to move into a triggered state, it would be like, it's more of like, to me, like triggered is more of like, again, when we start to lose track of we're so activated that there's a flooding effect that happens that we lose a sense of ourselves. But I think it helps to have these nuance in how we're talking about it. Why? Because it's important. I mean, Luis, we were talking, like, I don't know, last week or whatever, about, like, I think one of the reasons why, you know, why I love the languaging around the trauma world, especially in somatics, is because it enables us to plug ourselves in to an experience that might not have had any words before, you know, without, and it allows us to use language in a way that is non-pathological and allows us to understand the nuances of our experience. Why? To help us feel more free, to help restore agency, to help us so we don't feel like we're being, you know, bombarded by not understanding what's happening. You know, we're having all these feelings and we're not able to put words to it, or having all these sensations and we don't know how to put words or images or movement or anything to it. It's not articulated in any way of that articulation. It can be a painting, it can be a movement, it can be a word, it can be whatever. But like, we are expressive beings, we're creative beings. So safety, like you said, I really like it to say safety only is in reaction to, like, what to me is safe, what is not safe. I mean, what is the opposite of safety is rest, you know, or like or a state where, you know, you can't define it in opposition. It's not a state where there's no danger, right? Because then you're back to safety. You know, it's impossible to escape the binary on it. So it's an interesting phenomenon. And I think it's impossible for us to escape that experience too. As soon as we think of safety, we are in it invokes something of, like, you know, as opposed to, like, maybe the opposite of safety sometimes is a sense of community where we can feel, like you're saying, all our feelings, or a sense of feeling connected, where we can feel activated and connected, and that safety is not a concern because we're in the collective, you know? So anyway, I don't know, you know, who knows?
This is why I also love somatics, because the language is us trying to grasp at a way to identify and kind of make sense terms of the felt experience. Everyone listening, when they hear safety, there is going to be the opposite subconscious of danger or threat. And there's still that quality that we attach to what we call I'm safe. And we can feel it, in our bones, and people or places come to mind, again, as a reaction to an environment. It's a relational result. Safety, same thing as threat, is a relational result. And so I see it so relational that it's why I can't promise it, because I don't know what the alchemy of the relationship will create. I don't know what the chemistry or the formula will create. It's a mystery every time. And I think I'm appreciating, like when you said affinity, when Marika was saying about the spaces, like with all women or with all people of color, there's an affinity. So when you go in somewhere and you know this one thing that we all have in common, if that's the thing you connect to, you're doing a beautiful co-regulating in that way, because you're connecting to something and it's easing the field. And in my experience, there's still an avoidance happening with all the things that you might not connect to, all the parts that are different within that affinity. And I always feel like an anomaly in affinity groups, because there's so much I don't have in common with other people that look like me, have my history, have my, my identity, whatever it is. And so I find it interesting that we can, even all of us here, can have this conversation and connect, because we're talking about a language and a practice we really understand and live. And if we step outside of this into something else, we could have a complete activated, debate or disagreement. And so for me, it's always what's my capacity to vacillate between discomfort and disagreement with someone and like belonging and safety. I want to do both with an individual. I don't want to just have one or the other with them. And so but when you were saying I disagree slightly, my mind immediately said, stop gaslighting me. And I wanted to just bring in the term, the sentence, stop gaslighting me, as I tend to consistently see it relate to disagreements. And I thought we could all riff on that a little bit. So I wonder if, let's dive in.
Yes, let's talk about that. I think this actually really applies to safety, that for a lot of people, safety is knowing that I'll always be agreed with. And if I'm not being agreed with, or if I'm not, and this is another term, I want to be seen, I want to be heard. And what they're really saying is, I want you to agree with me. I want you to validate me. And if you don't agree with me, if you don't validate me, then you're gaslighting me. Those things are not synonymous.
Hold up, because I just got a little ahead. I just got disagreeing with me is being seen. And I thought we could play with that a little bit.
I mean, if you want me to see you, I can read you. You might not like it.
Reading me for filth is being seen. Yeah, no, it's so true. It's like, it's interesting because what you're saying is we have the way we want to be seen. And any way outside of that, then we'll go into the territory of you're not seeing me, I'm being harmed by you, you're gaslighting me, I'm triggered. Whereas there's a humbleness to, well, how do you see me? Like, I know how I see me. How do you see me? I think that's fascinating. We have to play with that more. I wonder why do we call it gaslighting? Why do we call people disagreeing with us gaslighting us? Couldn't be further from what gaslighting is, but why do we call it that?
Can I just put a little historical context on this?
Go for it.
Term gaslight. Do you guys know where the term gaslighting comes from?
But educate, tell them about it.
But tell us, please.
Right. So it came from a movie that actually won an Academy Award in the 40s called Gaslighting. It's a great movie, actually. If you have a chance to watch it, it's a really good and creepy movie, and it's kind of ahead of its time. But it was literally, this guy takes this woman to live with him, and basically, like, for whatever, to manipulate her, he turns down the lights. And that time it was only gas. And so she would, the lights would flicker, and she'd say, "There's something about the lights," and he said, "No, there isn't." And he'd keep doing things like that till she lost her mind. And that was the way he tortured her, essentially, and manipulated her into, whatever the plot of the movie is, which I don't totally remember. But that is where the term comes from. And for some reason it's rocketed into like you said,
rocketed.
It comes out of everybody's mouth. It's as if it's completely if you're truly gaslighting, you are really messing with somebody.
Oh yeah. That's a long-term
intentionally torturing somebody, which does happen.
Yes.
like, let's just name that. It does happen
Yes, it does.
way more than we want to say it happens, but it happens a lot. But not as much. It was like, you know, the 700 million TikTok videos on it or something, you know, like,
Oh
that's
yeah.
gaslighting. Yeah.
There's a lot
Sorry.
of times where someone will say to me, like when we're in a group or something over the years, someone will say, and they'll be talking about a situation with a person, you know, we'll be doing a demo and they'll say, and they totally gaslit me. And I'll say, okay, tell me what that meant to you. What happened? And every single time I've heard it, not in private practice, actually, I will say, I've had people who were actually gaslit for like decades, and people
Yes, it
growing
does
up with their
happen. Let's
fathers.
just say that.
Yeah. So I came from being in that, where I was like used to that being the term. And then when I got into more group work, especially online, people that kind of drop into things, they're just learning. The term is often used for a situation where someone didn't see it the way I saw it. They disagreed with me. And not in that intentional, manipulative way, but in the way of like, I didn't raise my voice. I just said something really firmly. And they're like, you gaslit me. And so I wonder how do we navigate, especially people listening, the difference. Let's play with like, what is the difference? I want all of us, anyone that wants to, say how they classify for people that are confused what gaslighting actually is compared to someone just seeing it differently than you are.
And why is that important to do it? I'd say that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Why is it important?
Who wants to do it? Camille, you doing it or you not doing it?
All right, I'll do it. Well, I mean, one of the fundamental, I guess, factors for me is a point you both raised, that it doesn't have to be, but for me, it has to be done over a long period of time. It's not just we were having a one-off conversation, and in that conversation, this person disagreed with me and they gaslit me. Gaslighting is a really in-depth, manipulative, like this is the long game here, and like a slow trip of, because it's supposed to be so subtle to the point that you don't even realize it's happening.
That's right.
Versus we're having a conversation and we just disagree on how we see something. For me, if it's overt, it's not gaslighting. I don't have all the words to articulate it, but yeah.
No, I'm with you, because if I think of someone, like I think of what and this is a whole other term we won't get into, the narcissist, we probably won't get there today. But when I think about people that come from like actual, let's say, families where they grow up and both parents or one of them has narcissistic personality disorder, I like to call them expressions, because I like to humble myself, because so many people have like narcissistic expressions. But when we think about someone that can't hold someone's pain, that don't have the capacity even for their own accountability of their actions, there's something unconscious there even about the disagreement. It isn't like when someone says, I didn't yell at you, get over it. Or like when you have two people that were abused in a household by the same parent, let's say, the two siblings, and one grows up and goes to therapy, the other one just avoids it, and they go to their sister in their 30s. Do you remember when, you know, dad used to hit us or yell at us? What are you talking? That never happened. Your sister isn't gaslighting you. She has completely put it out of her body because she doesn't have the capacity to deal with the pain. That's different from this intentional, I know exactly what I'm doing here to get you to lose your connection to yourself and reality so I can take over. And I just think it's helpful that we go into that. But you said something there. Why is it important? So you tell us, as the resident psychologist here, tell us this situation.
I mean, to me, this whole discussion is important because words matter. And that if like, you know, what I really love about, you know, your guys' work is that, you know, we're forwarding and value and believe in that expanding our, like, understanding and deeply understanding ourselves is what helps free us and free our relationships. And so our life is full of life force, that we're able to connect with people and love freely. Yeah, as much as we can. And these words and the way we talk about trauma or any of these things now, this is the way we're using these words now. And that like, you know, love and attention comes specifically. So if we're not able to use, if we don't have the language to use it or the expression to use it, then it will remain dark. So the more specific we can be, again, this is not an intellectual exercise at all.
Right.
It's nothing to do with education or intelligence or anything like that. It's about specificity
Mhm.
and about our ability to use language accurately and facilely and without necessarily identifying with the words. Again, I mean, we can have this conversation in different language, take very different meanings,
Mhm.
right? So to me, that's why it's important that, like, you know, I don't want to, I've worked with so many people who have been tortured that I feel like it almost devalues people when we actually say, well, you're gaslighting. Actually, you're not.
Yep.
Let's reserve that for when that is actually happening.
Mhm.
And can you use your words or your expression in a way that accurately portrays how you're feeling, which might mean you feel upset or hurt, or I'm angry at you for saying that, as opposed to you're intentionally manipulating me.
Mhm. That's right.
Right. And so to me, that's important in terms of like everybody, being able to clearly communicate and be with each other in a way that's caring and loving and full of life force, as opposed to, like, making things vague.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree.
Love is specific. It's not vague.
I think that watering down is so important to me because when I go to the somatics of it, when I think of watering down, there's a numbness and dissociation of perception and feeling. When I think of like precision, like you said, precise, somatically, the precision is so embodied. Like I feel that. I feel the rupture in me when you disagree with me, but that doesn't mean you manipulated me. It just means I didn't like your answer. And I think there's something so honest about that. And to share that with someone rather than, tell them they're gaslighting you and doing something, share where that took you, and that opens up that beautiful intimacy. I just want to, just because of time, I'm just checking. Evan and Marika, you two, when I'm alone with you, are the least quiet people on the planet. And when we're on the podcast, these bitches will just witness us and barely say a word unless I look at them. So what is going on in your
Yeah,
mind?
I'll jump in. I didn't want to derail the conversation because I feel like my brain is kind of going in a slightly different direction. But what's coming up for me is just since we were playing with terms that were pop psychology, I think that just the nature of things becoming popular, they're moving quickly, they're easier to access. And I think just by the nature of anything that becomes popularized, it kind of necessarily has to lose a level of nuance and depth for it to be passed so quickly from person to person, and to be so easily accessed that you see it and you pick it up and you. So I mean, I think a lot about, even like popular music, that you hear it, and if you hear it and you love it the second you hear it, I feel like that's usually what qualifies as pop music. Doesn't mean it necessarily doesn't have depth, but in order for it to move so quickly, you don't sink so deeply into it. And I think that when words become very popular like this, they're passed from person to person without taking the time to draw apart, well, what does that really mean? And like, what does that really dive into? I was really appreciating, that Thayer was bringing this back up. Then I feel like with somatics, it really is, and then going, back through the lineage of these different things, like focusing and just to be able to create a more diverse language to describe these inner sensations and experiences that we didn't necessarily have words for beforehand. There's such a depth and there's such a bringing back to the body and the sensation from that kind of work, but when it gets pulled from that context, it loses kind of all of its roots, and then it just becomes another synonym for whatever word is happening.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
That's great.
Where does it go for you, Marika? What's happening as you witness this?
Well, I was just thinking of when you were using all the different words that you guys brought up, like kind of to Evan's point, like I hear everybody who I know who gets broken up with or breaks up with someone, they're with a narcissist. Because saying they were an asshole isn't big enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it feels like we take these terms, like triggering really means that, like, if you're triggered me, that's really telling me that, like, you're a bad person, or you're like, you're wrong, or like they're just sort of extra, like they're used in this really extra way now, because people aren't going around being like, he really lacked empathy. You know what I mean? He was a fucking narcissist. You know what I mean? But really, he just didn't. It just didn't work. It probably just didn't work out in the same way. Some people are definitely narcissists, but I just it's like I see all the therapy memes of it with this word in it. I hear all my girlfriends adopting it. Like, I hear like maybe a a single digit, niece or nephew use it. I'm like, how do you know that word? So it's like
the third word
it's
they
like-
utter is narcissist.
yeah, so it's like very popular. Yeah, I can just like hear a little elementary kid being like, my teacher's a narcissist. Like, that'd be hilarious.
Narcissist, N-A-R-C.
I know, spell narcissism.
Yes, I'm not like a spelling bee in third grade.
I will like pass on that.
Spell nar, and they just pointed at their parent in the audience. Yeah, I love that. That's so brilliant because I think you're absolutely right. There, if I say this person gaslit me, there's going to be gasps in the room. It makes this experience really big. But to say like, oh my gosh, for years and years and years, I wanted them to see it how I did, and they just couldn't. That's like so really invites you into that kind of collective heartbreak of what it's like just to not be on the same wavelength all the time.
Mm-hmm.
When ask just to add to like to this, like again, that's why I think I'm a fan of your guys' work too, because I suspect that if you did some did a study, a pre and post 6-week class or 6-week course, right? I wonder, I wonder if we studied like the ability to articulate one's experience, right? Like, and then expanded vocabulary, expanded understanding, just that alone helps people, like understanding, like raises awareness and enables us to communicate with ourselves and therefore other people in an easier way.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of cuts through the noise of like having like these watered down, like what's mindfulness in popular culture? We're talking about a 3,000-year-old tradition that's now like
An app.
What is mindful?
It's an app. That's the answer there.
Exactly. It's you can buy it for $3.99 a month.
Right.
Yeah.
So, which is great. I'm not saying it's not helpful to people. Like all of these things are helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I just fear that like there's so much magic to the specificity.
Mm-hmm.
So listening through some of the podcasts and talking to like everybody here is using very specific language.
Mm-hmm.
It's very coherent if we're using attachment language.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a coherent narrative, then sometimes it's really hard to have a coherent narrative. We've been very hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So like this helps us, gives us some words to what was wordless and enables us to feel healing. I know we don't have much time, but I wanted some of the other words that we just to throw out.
Wait, pause. I have to say something you just said, and then we should all just do a quick dump of the words. And then
Yeah.
But you said something so important, giving words to the wordless. And I've been realizing how spoiled I am, because most of my social interactions are either in the groups that I hold with my friends, my colleagues, and everyone's pretty somatically, informed in my life, which just means they feel their bodies. And what you just said, they have language to express and explain and witness even their own experiences. And so when I think about coherency socially in this way you're bringing it in, it's because we're talking from our bodies. We're feeling like when Marika says what she says and Evan says what he says and Camille and you, we're talking about experiences that have been sensational that we've like investigated and sat with. And then the words come from there rather than something out there someone else fed us that we're just kind of reiterating. And there's some embodied wisdom to that just lights me up. And I could talk like that. And I do now for the rest of my life. It's the only way I enjoy conversing at this point. So I appreciate that you've witnessed, now you're part of that coherence, because I find that really gorgeous. I thought we could all just do, we have 2 minutes. Any words we haven't discussed, we're not going to discuss them. Let's just drop them. So Thayer, why don't you drop yours for us?
Embodied. Hurt, injured. What was that? Boundaries.
Oh. Yeah, I think mine.
Boom.
I think mine was harm. What was the other one I had? I had harm.
Brain. You had the brain.
I told there. I'm just gonna start listing all words like brain, vehicles. Like I'm just done with them all. I'm done with them all. How about you, Camille?
canceled, seen and heard, honor.
Heard. Okay, Marika.
Self-care.
Oh,
It's fine.
The way you just said that makes me never want to say it again. Oh, you forgot to say journey.
powerful. That was powerful.
I have to add journey to the list.
Yes,
Journey.
you have to.
Journey. Evan, what about you?
Well, you already said it, but holding space was a good one. I feel like all of these words, like I can both laugh at them, and then I'm like, this is like all I say all day.
Exactly.
You do.
Like, I like that, like, you know, like describe myself. I'm like, you know, holding space. Where I'm like, oh God, what am I? Yeah.
I'm a space holder.
You're
I
holding
know what you
nonverbal
mean.
space so well. What,
I think I described this someone today. I was like, narcissism is not self-care or setting boundaries.
Wow.
You know, it's just gaslighting somebody who's like, you know, embodied, doesn't have any truth and driving a vehicle.
And getting triggered while doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Thayer, for having fun with us, because we like to have this kind of fun. And it's so good to do these conversations with brevity and fun and levity, because maybe not brevity, but definitely levity, because people listening get to like have the joy of it being silly, because we're silly. This whole human experience is so silly. And these terms are desperation to make sense of it. So it's really fun just to have you and to play with it. And anyone that wants to see more about Thayer's work, you can go into the episode details and we'll have his information there. So we're going to hop off and we're going to have our little private Q&A with our members. So we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember, those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com.